vehicle now. Exit the vehicle.
Just because it's quote unquote the most serious doesn't mean the palm strike to the face was what wasn't excessive.
I just don't see it that way.
Other officers behind him are pulling him back. It is impossible to go down in one direction when we have four men apparently over 200
Who created
pounds
that
pulling us.
That's not, I don't think that's true, because you don't go up, you go from the car to the ground. All right, ladies and gentlemen, like I always do, and I think I need to do this more. I'm okay with dissent. I'm okay with people agreeing and disagreeing with me. At the end of the day, I don't care. A lot of times when I'm talking about a subject, is because I believe that I'm 100% correct on the subject. I believe that I do enough research, and I know with my experience that I'm accurate on the subject, or I don't talk about the subject. So there's a lot of people that have made videos about me, supportive of me, and most of it is against me when it comes to the McNeil Jr.'s traffic stop. And so I wanted to bring on two individuals whom are respectable in their, in their fields of work. Both are attorneys. And I wanted to kind of bring up some of these issues and have, some attorneys speak from their perspective, because a lot of people go, Brandon, you're just a police officer, you don't know what you're talking about. And then some have referenced one of the attorneys that I brought on as a person who opposed what I had to say. So I want to have a conversation. It's not a debate. We may have disagreements, but this is not a debate. I just want to talk and be open-minded to different perspectives. Obviously, believing my perspective is right, but we shall see and let you guys be the judge. So joining me today on this conversation is Andrew Branca. He's a defense attorney, one of the well-known defense attorneys online and abroad. One of the people, and I'm gonna be honest, like, he's one of my favorite ones. When I have a question about a certain topic, I go and look at his videos, whether I agree with him or not. I do respect and think that he's very intelligent. The lead attorney is a new individual that I saw more recently. I've seen him around, and I think the lead attorney and Andrew are friends, and they've done podcasts together. So the other guest that I have on is the lead attorney, and we're going to discuss the McNeil Jr. traffic stop. So welcome to the show, brothers.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
All right, so let me just put my perspective out there. I think a lot of people have heard me already. Obviously, it's on my channel, but I believe that the traffic stop was legitimate, that the inclement weather argument was legitimized, not only by the court, but also when you look at the statute, I think it's very clear that all rain will include whether it's raining and stop raining, whether the rain is in and out or not. And then I believe that the use of force could be articulated by the police officer that was necessary in his perspective. And that's just my opinion. I don't necessarily agree. I don't think I would have slapped the guy in the face when he was in the car. I do think the use of force outside of the car was a little more appropriate, but I do think that the officer will not be held criminally liable. The defense now is a civil matter, which I think is just a money grab. So I want to start with you, the lead attorney, because I know you dissented from my opinions on this. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think from start to finish? From the traffic stops, legitimacy, to the use of force, to what you think the outcome will be if you had to make an estimation in your, being an attorney.
100%. I do want to say initially, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your platform. I really appreciate it. You're one of the big dogs here on YouTube. So big shout out to you for that. I want to agree with you, and I do agree with you on one of the main points about this whole case, in the sense that I believe that this young driver should have complied. You were very strong on that, very forceful, and I 100% agree. And I don't think I've seen many people say that he shouldn't have complied. So I absolutely agree with you there. I do think that the stop was probably okay, if nothing else, for the seatbelt. We can talk about the vehicle having tinted windows and how maybe he couldn't see the seatbelt. It also looked like when the officer broke through the window, the young man had his seatbelt on, but that doesn't mean that he didn't rush and put his seatbelt on while the stop was occurring. So I think that the stop is probably fine. I do disagree pretty strongly about the use of force. Now, I will say that I thought that when the officer broke the window and struck the dude in the face, I thought it was a punch. And I watched your video and I slowed it down. And based on what you said, I agree with you that it was let's say, an open hand palm strike to the face. I was I didn't know that until I watched your video. So you educated me on that. I do think that open hand, that heel palm strike, I thought it was excessive. And then when they drug the driver out and the officer hit the guy in the jaw with the closed fist, I thought that was excessive. And then I thought the leg strikes also were excessive. So maybe we disagree there, but we do have some agreements in this whole situation.
Oh, real quick before I get Andrew in, I could have sworn, and maybe I'm mistaken, that when I watch your video, Lee, that you disagree with me on the traffic stop. And I thought your point was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought your point was that the traffic stop was illegitimate, meaning that you argued against because it wasn't raining at the time of the traffic stop, that the traffic stop couldn't have been conducted according to the statute, or shouldn't have been conducted according to the statute. Am I mistaking your point, or have you changed your point?
Well, I haven't changed my point in the sense that you brought up a lot of different issues with your video that I guess Lackluster had covered or something like that. So my video basically was only on one aspect of this whole incident, which was the rain. I didn't really get into, I don't believe, too much of the strikes or excessive force or anything like that. And I do believe that the officer needed to see that the driver was committing the infraction while the rain was occurring. Now, we don't have any dash cam showing, that the rain was falling while the officer saw the driver without his headlights. And I did say that the driver needed to be kind of pulled over while the rain was falling, or let's say while it was raining. And now I did say also that if we're going to be technical about it, that's not true. It could be that the officer pulls the guy over and then it stops raining, and then he approaches the car and it's not raining. And if we want to be more technical, we could say that the officer could see him a mile away in the rain and it's both raining, and then the officer pulls him over into a spot where it's not raining. And we can even be even more technical and say that the officer was driving in a place that wasn't raining, saw the driver in a place where it was raining, and let's say initiated or decided to initiate the stop there, even though it wasn't raining where the officer was driving, but it was raining where the driver was driving. So we can get very technical, but it's a YouTube video, so I didn't want to go down all of those paths. And again, I didn't address a lot of the issues that I'm bringing up now in terms of the use of force and things like that. So I limited my video, which I think was over 20 minutes, to just one issue.
Perfect. Andrew, what's your take on it from start to finish, legitimacy all the way through to what you think the discipline may be when it comes to the officers that decided to use force?
So, I mean, a few thoughts. One is we can actually take Lead's kind of hierarchy of scenarios and even go another step further, right? If you guys, I don't know if you've lived in Florida, I have, the rain can be extremely localized. Like there can be like a wall of rain. It could be raining across the street hard and not a drop of water where you are. It could have been a scenario where McNeil was driving and it was not raining where he was driving, but there was rain falling between McNeil and the officer. And to the officer, it looked like McNeil was driving in the rain with no lights on. So McNeil could have been in the right. He could have been in the right. He could have said, listen, it was never raining where I was operating my motor vehicle, so I didn't need the lights on. But here's the thing. All this use of force stuff is happening in the context of a traffic stop. And in the context of the traffic stop, it doesn't matter whether the officer's right or not. That's not what's decided at the side of the road. Whether the officer is ultimately right is decided later. It's decided in traffic court, or whether the charges will be dismissed for the traffic stop. During the traffic stop, the driver is absolutely bound to obey lawful orders to do with the traffic stop, whether the officer is correct or not. The driver could be 100% correct, and the officer could be 100% wrong, and the driver is still obliged to obey the lawful commands of that officer, present his license, registration, insurance, comply with lawful orders for safety, get out of the car if there's legitimate reason to get it, all that stuff he has to do, and he certainly has to comply with the rest. And if he doesn't, the officer is privileged to use, at least in this particular scenario, non-deadly force to compel compliance with that lawful arrest. And it's generally, in my experience, not the officers who are determining how much force is used in the arrest. It's the suspect who's determining how much force to use in the arrest. The officers, once they've made the decision to make your lawful arrest, are not going to not make the arrest because you're being non-compliant. That's not how the world works. They will continue to use force until they compel you to comply with that arrest. So it doesn't matter if McNeil was right for purposes of the use of force in a traffic stop. He has to comply with those lawful orders. Things like, I mean, we can disagree on a personal level, whether the hand strike, whether the punch when he was out of the car. Personally, I think those are well within the reasonable bounds for an officer to use in those circumstances, but reasonable people can disagree on that. I mean, the open palm strike in the car, that's just a stun technique. He still was not complying. He still was not getting out of the car. And once they had him out of the car, you'll notice when the punch is delivered, they'd actually had him upright. They pull him over because they're trying to get him to the ground to cuff him. And he raises himself back up. So he's still not complying with lawful arrest. That's when he gets the fist to the face. They get him to the ground. And, you know, if I have to believe the officers or the suspect who's been unlawfully non-compliant for the whole duration of this interaction, the officers, all of them, black and white, are saying even on the ground, he was not complying with arrest. That's why he was getting the fist strikes to the legs and the lower body. Again, these are not likely to inflict death or serious bodily injury. These are just pain compliance techniques that ought to be expected if you're not complying with lawful orders from police.
Now, let me add this one component here, because I want to go through a couple of things that people disagree with me on. And because, you know, I feel like we're going to get to the traffic stop part. We got to go back to this traffic stop part, because one of the reasons I brought you on, Lee, is because you disagree with me vehemently, in my opinion, on that point. And Hodge Twins made a video about it, agreeing with you that I was wrong, which would make the premise of everything that happened preceding, you know, the traffic stop wrong. But so let's get to the technicality of the law, because,
and if I could, let me just jump in here. You know, I think my video focused solely on the rain issue, let's say, but the stop could have been good with the seatbelt issue. So let's just assume, for example, that everybody's wrong on the rain and the officer should not have pulled him over because of the rain. They still had an independent reason to pull him over, which was the traffic stop. And then if you listen closely, the officer had an additional third reason. Now, I'm not sure if that third reason was the suspended license. I'm not sure if somehow they ran his tag while he was driving, or I'm not sure what happened, but the officer had three reasons. Now, you can call them pretexts, but pretexts are allowed. So just because one pretext fails doesn't mean the stop is bad if one of the other two pretexts are fine.
And by the way, it's worth keeping in mind that the officer does not have to state every reason he stopped you. He could have additional reasons that were never said on that body-worn camera that would be perfectly valid for a stop. In fact, technically speaking, the officer who stops you does not need to give you any reason for the stop. He has to have a reason that he can justify later for the stop. But in the moment of the stop, he does not have to give you a reason for why he stopped you. Yeah, he can stop you, he can run your plate, and as long as he had a legitimate reason, and then he can let you go and never have given you a reason for the stop.
Yeah, let's go through methodically about these things, because I think the people would love to hear from attorneys, because this is something that comes up all the time, right? People are still telling me that the stop was illegitimate because it wasn't raining. Can we get to this point to talk about it? The statute reads, and I'm gonna paraphrase it, that you must have your headlights on during dusk dawn, any rain, fog, or smoke. And
well, I do want to say it says during any rain, fog, or smoke. The during actually is an important point.
Right. And I would argue that during is meaning while it is raining, meaning that it's overcast, it has rain, and it continues to rain, whether or not it has stopped for a period of time or continue for a period of time. There's rain on the ground. There's visibility issues. It's in any rain, meaning that it had to have been raining. Now, let me show this clip real quick of the rain droplets on the car, because this is what my main point was when I made the video, was there had to have been rain at some point. Right. It doesn't appear in reasonableness that this was a car wash. Right. He just washed his car. He didn't indicate he washed his car. It's clearly gloomy outside, rain on the ground. It had to have been raining at some point for this car to be as covered in rain droplets as it is. even while he's traveling and driving, sometimes the raindrops will just brush off the car because of the wind if he's driving a distance, but it's spotted as if the rain had just hit the car, at least in the last several minutes. So with that being said, do you guys believe that that is covered in the statute, which means that does it have to be raining at the time of the stop, or is it raining conditions, meaning that it's off and on raining, you know, when the stop was conducted?
Can I start there, lead?
Absolutely.
So I would say, you know, as a criminal defense attorney, right? So I put a very heavy burden on the state. My reading of this statute is that the officer would have had to have seen him operating the vehicle without headlights on while rain was falling on the car. Not always raining a little earlier or raining a little later. It has to be raining in the moment. The officer has to see him operating the car in rain without the headline on. That's a valid reason to stop. I don't think once it stops raining, you can turn your headlights off like that, and you're still valid under Florida law because it's no longer raining. So that would not be a valid reason for a stop. That said, I think none of us knows what happened, right? We weren't there. Nobody evaluating this in traffic court or civil court or any other court was physically present when this happened. All we can do is make reasonable inferences from the evidence that we're seeing. And the evidence that we're seeing is a car covered with a lot of drops of water, which would be consistent with it raining. Now, what reason would we have not to believe that? I don't know. I've not heard. Is there any reason? Did the cops see him pulling out of a car wash? I mean, what's the evidence that would be contrary to rain? Of course, we can speculate reasons, but speculation is not a legal defense.
Right, and I would agree with Branca and you, Officer Tatum. I believe at some point it was raining, so I think we all agree there. I do believe that the rain needed to occur during, or let's say the driver needed to have his headlights on during the rain. Now, I had not thought of the situation that Branca mentions, which is possible, especially in Florida, where the officer is at one location and it's not raining. The driver is at one location and it's not raining, but there happens to be rain in between. And the officer feels like the driver is in violation of the statute because he's seeing through the rain and assuming that it's raining where the driver is. That's very, very technical, but he's absolutely right on that. And we can see how tough it can be to kind of get to the bottom of these cases because they're so fact dependent. But I do believe, I agree with Branca that it's not enough that it rained at some point. It's not enough that the weather is inclement, which I agree with you it was. If we look, it's certainly cloudy out there. I do believe that there needed to be rain during the time that the driver had his headlights on.
Right. So I think that's good that I heard from both of you guys, because I think that you both disagree with my assessment, which is that, you know, the way I looked at it was the totality of circumstances in the rain, which means that if it's raining outside, it had been raining, his car is drenched. Now, he didn't mention that the windshield wipers were on, because he didn't mention that part, but I think in the statute it says if the windshield wipers are operating, then you have to have your headlights on if you're operating the windshield wipers. Now, he didn't say that. I don't know if that was the case or not. But so I could concede that maybe my interpretation of it is different than what the lawyers will say, right? Because as a police officer, I would interpret it as saying, okay, I clearly have been driving in rain. He clearly driving in rain. It may have stopped raining at this point, but that doesn't preclude him from continuing in a raining condition, meaning that when he drive down the street, it's going to rain again, and he's not having his lights on at all. So,
and by the way, we all come up with rules of thumb for these things, right? We're not driving with a statute book next to us, and the driving schools probably teach their students, hey, your headlights go on when your windshield wipers go on, as a handy rule of thumb. But the statute doesn't say anything about windshield wipers. It says it has to be during rain, snow, or fog. So we may all use that rule of thumb. The police making stops may be using the windshield wiper thing as a rule of thumb. But if we're going to be talking about the law, the statute actually doesn't require that.
And I think that the statute should be a little more specific, because it is very ambiguous, right? Dusk dawn, which can be, most people kind of get dusk dawn, But when it says during any rain, fog, or smoke, what does that? It's hard to determine how much fog is considered fog, right? How much smoke is considered smoke in which a person can detect that, okay, this is enough smoke that I think this is smoke that I have to put my lights on, or this is enough fog that I think I should have lights on. You know what I'm saying? It's like these
or
conditions
enough rain, right? If 1 or 2 drops hit your windshield, you don't put your wipers on for 1 or 2 drops. You just
Right.
you wait to see what's going to happen, right? But I would suggest, and we don't send our best and brightest to the state legislatures, let's admit it, right? So you can't expect great things out of many of these statutes. But to the more they're ambiguous, the more important it is that the driver comply, because all ambiguity means is that the driver and the officer could have a difference of opinion about whether the conduct falls within the scope of the statute, and there should be a stop. But we've made, as a matter of public policy, we've made the decision that they don't get to debate that as equals on the side of the road. The cop makes the decision on whether it's a stop. He makes the decision on whether to write a ticket. He makes all these decisions there on the side of the road. Now, if it turns out he's wrong, you can try to follow up in traffic court with that, or even civil court if you believe your rights have been violated. But in that moment, as long as the cop is otherwise acting lawfully consistent with the traffic stop, you have to obey his commands. It's not a debate forum there during the traffic stop.
I think we all agree to that, right? We agree to that. Is not a legitimate, way to handle it. Is that you think you're going to litigate or something on the side of the road? And can I bring up?
Even if you're right, you could be right and the cop could be wrong, but we still don't allow that.
And can I bring up a Supreme Court case from 2014? It was Heien versus North Carolina. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that one, but I read it the other day, and it was an instance where even though the cop was actually wrong at the initial stop, it was done reasonably and in good faith. So they still granted him the traffic stop initially, and he was able to have the drugs that he found admissible in court. Which the scenario was, a guy was driving down the street with one tail light. The cop pulled him over for one tail light, found drugs and everything. But then it was argued in court that, wait a minute, the statute says that you only have to have one operating tail light. But the Supreme Court ruled that the officer was acting reasonably and in good faith when he made the stop. So they allowed him to keep the stop and also keep the drugs that he found. And I brought up that case in the defense of, even if it wasn't raining and the officer still pulled him over, I would argue that the Supreme Court would agree that he did it in good faith, given the ambiguity potentially of the traffic of the statute. And that even if the statute says during rain and it wasn't technically raining when he pulled him over, that maybe that Supreme Court case would still give the officer the right to potentially do that anyway.
Well,
because it wasn't egregious.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I would disagree with that. We have 2 types of mistakes in law generally. We have mistakes in fact, and then we have mistakes in law. And officers are given wide latitude with mistakes in fact. So if they get something wrong, a stop can still be upheld. And even if it's a mistake in law, the stop can be upheld sometimes if the statute is ambiguous. But here, where the statute says during any rain, fog, or smoke, or whatever it says to that extent, I would argue that statute is pretty clear. It's not ambiguous. And so to the extent that a statute is going to be held non-ambiguous, it's going to be clear, then the court case that you cited really is not going to be applicable. So it'll be a bad stop, even if the officer was mistaken on the law, if the law is clear. Now, if the law is ambiguous, then you're absolutely right, and the stop can still be deemed valid.
But
Because
keep in mind what you're talking about with the Supreme Court case you cited. What happened there was the court decided, the question was, what was the traffic stop legitimate? Therefore, should evidence collected, contraband found in the vehicle, be admitted into evidence or not? That's all happening later, right? That decision about whether or not evidence should be admitted is not happening on the side of the road.
Correct.
Even if the Supreme Court had said, all that evidence has to be excluded, whatever decision the Supreme Court would make about the evidence, that driver in the moment at the stop still has to comply with the officer, right? So again, it hardly matters what would happen later. That's inconsequential to the use of force decisions here. The use of force decision is, can they use non-deadly force to compel compliance with their lawful orders? And the answer is unequivocally yes. He has to comply. If he doesn't comply, he's subject to arrest. If he's subject to arrest, they can use non-deadly force to compel that arrest. I will say that McNeil ought to thank his lucky stars that they did not see that knife on the floorboard until after they had him out of the car, because he certainly would have been held at gunpoint had they seen that, and he might well have been shot if they thought he was reaching for it.
Yeah, let's jump to the use of force, because I think the audience can see what the perspective is. I would concede that if I were the officer trying to defend that in court, maybe I wouldn't win that case, right? Or maybe the lawyers would articulate that the statute was very clear. So I concede on that point. Let's talk about the use of force, because this is another point where people are saying, forget all the rest of it. Everybody agrees he should have listened. But to use a palm strike, some people still think it's a punch in the face. Now, the courts in Florida have determined that the officers had done nothing wrong, meaning that they're not going to press charges against the officers after review of the footage. And so do any of you believe that the officers will be held responsible criminally at some point, or will the officers be held responsible civilly because of the use of force in the car? We'll just start with the in the car one first.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Lee.
Yeah, let me jump in, because I hear you say this sometimes, Officer Tatum, and I do disagree with it. You're saying, well, the state decided, let's say they're not going to pick up the prosecution, so the state decided that the driver had done nothing wrong. Now that's inaccurate if we're going to be honest.
Can you explain that? Can you explain that for the audience? Because I think the average person would believe, and I would believe, if they presented it to the prosecution or they presented it to the state's attorney and they said they're not going to bring charges because I'm assuming that they made the determination that there's nothing illegal that occurred when they reviewed the footage. So can you explain that to me?
Yeah, you can see Branca shaking his head. And I think you're exactly right. A lot of people do believe that. A lot of people believe that these DAs, they prosecute anything that they deem to be a crime. And if they don't prosecute it, then they deem it not to be a crime. And that's just simply not the case. DAs can have a lot of different decisions about whether or not they want to prosecute a crime. Some of it can be political. Some of it can be corruption. Some of it can be they're worried about their conviction rate. And so they don't want to try a case that's iffy. They want to make sure that they have a great case and they're not going to risk their conviction rate. Prosecutors have wide latitude on what they are going to bring to trial or not. And they're the ones that get to decide. So a prosecuting office can decide not to bring a case for many reasons. And that never means that they determine that the defendant or the would-be defendant was guilty. I can go on a lot about this. I want to let
me push back on that just real quick, because I want to make sure that my perspective is clear. You know, when I make the statement, it's not the nuance of this of what is occurring, right? The reason for prosecution, the reason for not corruption, all that. That's not the relevance of what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that they didn't bring charges because, and I would argue that to the public or to the process of prosecution, they decide not to prosecute, and they're citing that they don't believe that there was anything criminal that occurred. And this is what the police chief said in his press conference, is that the state's attorney said they don't believe that it was anything criminal associated with the use of force. And now it's going to be processed through the police department and figuring out whether or not he violated policy. So whether they did it, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this is from a police officer perspective, whether they did it for whatever reason, it still is being determined that they're not going to, at least now, they're not going to press charges against them.
Well, it's two different questions we're asking, right? One is that the prosecutors may have looked at it and may have concluded this doesn't look like a crime to us, so we're not going to prosecute it. That sounds like what the police chief recounted in his press statement. But Lee's making an important point. Just because a prosecutor decides not to pursue a case that decision can be made completely independent of the legal merits of the case. The prosecutor could have other more important cases on his desk. He could be going on vacation next week. He may not want to deal with a pity-patty little case when he's got murder cases he can make a career on. Maybe he wants to run for, I don't know, a higher office, and he doesn't want to piss off members in the community by pursuing a particular. There's lots of factors that can lead a prosecutor to say, you know what, I'm not going to pursue this case that have nothing to do with the legal merits of the case. Now, it's also true a prosecutor could look at the case, make a legal merits analysis, decide it doesn't look like a reasonable case to pursue. He doesn't believe he can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and on the legal merits decide not to pursue. But just because he's decided not to pursue, you can't assume that that means he's concluded the underlying conduct was lawful. And a lot of normal people get in trouble with this because they learn their law from what they read in the media, and they'll hear about someone who did something, and then the person wasn't prosecuted, and they'll decide, oh, what that person did must have been lawful, or they would have been prosecuted. No, 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 no. What that person did could have been a clear-cut crime, but for various reasons, the prosecutor simply decided not to pursue the case. The same exact case on the same prosecutor's desk a week later could be fully prosecuted to the extent of the law.
100%. And if I could just jump in, because this kind of ties directly. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you jump in, Lee, I think we all agreed on this point. I think my point was that the police chief had said that they determined that there was no criminal activity and that he was going to pursue his investigation internally. Now, I just want the audience to know that I have dealt with this before, where in the state of Arizona, the state prosecutor, or at least the city, let me see, the state prosecutor, I got to figure out how they do this. In Tucson, Arizona, you could get caught with weed and they would downgrade it to a misdemeanor. In Phoenix, if you get caught with weed, it's a felony. And so for some reason in the city, they decided to not prosecute it as a felony, and they prosecute it as a misdemeanor, which
discretion, just prosecutorial discretion.
So yep. I've experienced this, so I do understand that point.
And let me just to your last point, you're saying that the sheriff said this and the sheriff said that. I would not take the sheriff's word about why the prosecution's office declined to take this case. His word to me means absolutely nothing. So that's one thing. But to get back to the prosecutors deciding to prosecute a case or not, there's a very famous case that wrapped up maybe this year, where I think it was a year or two ago, there was a black man running around a neighborhood. He was looking into houses that were unfinished. A lot of people would do that. A lot of white couples would go into these unfinished houses and look at the houses. He was doing the same thing. He was out for a jog. A couple of people, a father and a son, didn't like it. They confronted him. Another man joined in, and they ended up shooting him and killing him with a shotgun. It's the Ahmaud Arbery case. The prosecutor on that case said, hey, I looked at it. I didn't see anything wrong. Now, it turns out that the killers, and I can call them killers, murderers, because even though the prosecutor's office failed to prosecute the case, the family made such an uproar that they got a new prosecution's office in who prosecuted the case, and the brother, the husband, and the father and the son were convicted, I think, with life without parole. It turned out that the father had been the DA's chief investigator for years. And so, of course, she's not going to want to prosecute the case, and she didn't. And they had to bring another prosecutor in to look at it without this air of influence. That prosecutor did prosecute the case, and they were found guilty of murder one, and sentenced to life without parole. On top of that, they prosecuted the DA. They prosecuted the DA because they said you knew what was going on and you were violating your oath. Now, our best criminal defense attorney we have here in the state, Brian Steele, an amazing attorney, came in at the last minute and saved her on a technicality. Found out that the prosecutor's office had attached the wrong oath to the indictment, so there was a flaw in the indictment. The trial had already started, double jeopardy attached. and she was able to walk. But this just goes to your case, or to a lot of the public thinking, hey, if the prosecuting office doesn't prosecute the case, then that means that the person's innocent, and that's just not true at all.
I love you made that point. I disagree with you. I agree with you and disagree with you on the same point. I think this is an example of mob rule and political prosecution. I believe, and I'll make it real quick, I believe that they were correct in the original prosecution, and that it was because of mob rule, and it was because of high-powered attorneys and the racial dynamic, is that they picked up the case and ended up prosecuting this father, son, and also a friend of theirs who they threw the book at. So I think this is a situation where they got it right the first time, and then it was overturned because of political reasons. And we can do a whole live stream on that one, because I made a video about that long ago, and I got a lot of backlash over it. But
I think you should have gotten a lot of backlash, because a jury of their peers in their community found them guilty.
We can argue.
Okay.
We'll do this in another time.
Okay.
About the jury instructions too, because that was an ambiguous statute that was done, I don't know, 50 years ago, that they never changed. And then
150. More than 150 years was the citizens arrest statute.
The jury instructions, I think, could be perceived as biased, but because it was a black guy and it's two white guys and the political pressure, I think they had to throw the book at him in that situation. I don't agree that, and he wasn't jogging. I think we can all agree that he wasn't jogging, right? I mean, at least that point. Can we all agree that Ahmaud Arbery wasn't jogging?
It's my understanding that he was looking in the houses and jogging, and then when the killers came out to murder him, he was running for his life. So he was running for his life. I agree with that.
That's not what he wasn't jogging. He had been breaking in that place before.
Well, a lot of other people, white couples with strollers and families, they were also in these houses. But I guess we're not going to talk about that.
They weren't breaking in. They hadn't. I don't want to do this.
Okay.
We got to do another thing. There's a lot to it. So, but let's get back to the point. I think we agree that just because the prosecution or the state prosecutors didn't take the case doesn't mean that there's not a crime afoot, 100%. Or like they actually committed a crime. Do you think that there could be a later prosecution of this case, even though, because like we saw at Ahmaud Arbery, you have the state prosecutor saying that there's no there, and then later it was picked up, and then there was charges brought all the way to life in prison. Do you guys think that there will be something similar to this with the public outrage, that just because the state didn't want to prosecute, that they will be prosecuted for excessive use of force?
Branca, what do you think?
I mean, anything could happen. Again, we have politically motivated prosecutions. They're a real thing in the real world, but it doesn't have the feel of that kind of case to me, mostly because there's no deadly force involved here. So he wasn't killed, he wasn't shot, he wasn't paralyzed. All the force they used was non-deadly force. They didn't know at the time they were pulling him out of the car that the knife was in the car. They didn't discover that until afterwards. So they were all using non-deadly force. Now, when you consider non-deadly force, there is a continuum of non-deadly force, right? A punch to the face is more force than pulling someone by the arm. So I guess reasonable people could disagree about whether that, that punch when he was standing upright was necessary or not. But it's still only a punch. It wasn't a gunshot. So I just don't see that happening. If these cops had gone to deadly force in pulling him out of the car, I would have been the first person to say that's an excessive use of force. There was nothing they knew at the time that could justify that, because they weren't aware of the knife at the time they were pulling him out of the car. But I think this palm strike to the head, the one punch to the face while he was struggling not to be brought to the ground, I think that all falls within the reasonable discretion of the officers. Keep in mind, no use of force looks pretty. It never looks pretty. It always looks ugly. And the driving force that compelled this particular use of force was McNeil's determined non-compliance with any facet of this arrest other than pulling over in the first place.
What do you think, Lee? I agree with Andrew on this one, but what's your thoughts?
I agree that I don't think the state is going to change their mind and prosecute this case. I think they would if the stakes were higher. I think anything beyond, let's say, a paralyzation of this guy, if this guy somehow maybe something happened with the use of force, let's say deadly force was imposed and the guy got shot in the spine and was paralyzed or something like that, then I think there would be more scrutiny. But I don't think anyone is going to take very seriously in terms of, looking at this case for prosecution. I don't think they're going to take a couple of punches to the face, or let's say an open hand palm strike to the face, and then a sucker punch to the jaw. So I agree with Branca on that. I disagree with Branca on the fact that this wasn't an excessive use of force, but I do agree with Branca that reasonable minds can disagree on this issue. So I do believe this was excessive, but I don't think it was excessive enough for the prosecution to feel any type of political will to change their decision.
And it was really very short too. I mean, this wasn't like a sustained beating, right? So even if it was just fists, but say the cops were just mad and wanted to beat him up because they were mad at him, right, for causing them trouble. But it was something like 5 seconds between that car door opens up and he's on the ground. So they used force to compel compliance. They got him cuffed up, and then the force ended. That feels a lot less like an excessive use of force than the Rodney King thing or many other scenarios we can think of.
Yeah, and I do. There is something else. Branca would say, "Well, all use of force looks ugly," and I just disagree. There are many types of force. Me taking you by the wrist and just cajoling you over. There are many things that an officer can do, putting his hands on an offender, which don't look ugly at all. In fact, they look pretty reasonable. In the video that I did reviewing your video, Officer Tatum, with Lackluster, I showed some amazing officers who ended up having to remove a driver. They busted her window, opened her door, undid her seatbelt, removed her physically. And to me, it was beautiful. And no one would say that was ugly. No one would say that was uncalled for.
But I think I seen this was the black officers, and they put a black girl who was not compliant in the Jeep. Is that the one?
There were some black officers on the scene. It was a white officer pulling over an unruly black woman driver. Yes.
Yeah, if it's the same clip, and here's the thing that I think people should understand too, is there's a very big difference in threat level and use of force with male and female. Right. I mean, this guy wasn't a small guy. I think he was, average size guy, or a little bigger than average.
6'3", 180 pounds. So
he was skinny, but he was tall. So he was pretty, I saw him kind of towering over the officers when they finally got him up. But I think that the use of force will be different between a woman. And if you saw a man palm strike a woman in the car like that and then punch her in the face, matter of fact, you would never see a video where a woman is resisting to the rate that McNeil is resisting and someone punches her in the face. You would never see that happen. And one reason is because the threat level and the perceived threat level of men and women are entirely different. And it's easy to pull a girl out of the car and throw her on the ground for the most part. A man is a little different. They get violent. They can become very strong. That guy could have been very strong. But and I want to say I agree with Andrew on this, because I think that what he's saying is that use of force that people don't understand is ugly. It's not that the use of force is wrong. It's that people don't like to see people get punched in the face. People don't like to see people get leg struck. People don't like to see people get slammed on the ground. They don't like to see people get hit, shot. I mean,
grabbed by the head, grabbed by the hair.
Grabbed by the hair. I mean, I tell you what, if I had cameras on me at least 5 times in my career, that people would be saying that I was the worst officer in the world and I should get fired outside of context, right? There was some big woman that we had to freaking use force to get her in the patrol car. We had to use pain compliance, and then her pants came down and she was faking like she was limp, and she was doing a lot of stuff. And if somebody paying the camera, they'll see us raking her arms up to pull her 250-pound limp body in the back of a patrol car. And her pants came down and her underwear was showing. And it looks horrible if you capture a certain moment, but it was all necessary because of the crime that she had committed. We had to get her in the car. It wasn't an option. And she wasn't being reasonable. She literally was faking like she was having a seizure. She was eating dirt. She was laying on the ground. She went limp, so we can't get her in the car. And she was 250 pounds, so she was a big girl. So,
And we have to keep in mind that the officer's training, experience, and reasonable subjective state of mind, right? So just earlier this year, we had the murder trial of a Michigan police officer, Christopher Shore, for pulling over a driver, Patrick Leoya, up in Michigan. It was like a perfectly normal traffic stop. The plate didn't match the vehicle. That was the reason for the stop. Turned out Leoya was super intoxicated, some insane blood alcohol level. And in 3 minutes, that traffic stop went from a normal, calm, reasonable traffic stop to Patrick Leoya shot in the back of the head because that officer was losing control of his weapons. And the officer ended up getting acquitted. But any police officer familiar with that title is going to think to himself, listen, I can't afford to let a traffic stop get out of control because in 3 minutes it could end up like that. And this guy could be dead and I could be on trial for murder, or I could be dead if I end up losing control of the fight. So I'm going to do what I need to do to get it, maintain and keep control over this interaction, especially with a non-compliant driver, as quickly and efficiently as I possibly can. Once the driver's cuffed up, then everybody's safe.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think that we really have to acknowledge that any man or any woman can be deadly. Anybody sitting in their car can pull out a gun from their waistband and assassinate an officer. That's just the reality of it. That is a possibility. But I do not believe that officers can escalate a situation because of speculation. So for example, I think you mentioned, Officer Tatum, that the driver in this case had this long knife at his feet. And then you said you proposed the hypothetical of what if it wasn't a knife? What if it was a gun? Well, if the driver has a gun by his feet, that is a very explosive, deadly potential situation. But I think the key word is potential. And it's not because there could be guns in the floorboard, we can start giving open hand and closed hand strikes to the community members just to make sure. Nothing in the law, I think, allows for that.
Yeah, but that's not why he was struck here. He wasn't struck
let me address,
for that reason.
This as just from a police officer perspective. It's really not you're speculating. It's that you're trying to gain compliance and set the tempo so that, especially when a person is non-compliant and not showing their hands, you have to have some level of deterrent, right? If a person is, like, for instance, the fact of even pulling them out of the car is because you have to make the situation safe for the police officers. So when they are non-compliant, a lot of times officers will say, step out of the car, because you want to eliminate the factor of them driving off, them pulling a weapon or anything, and removing them from the situation. When you have a guy that's non-compliant in a car and his hands are low and he's not really consistently showing his hands, there is a potential where you want to distract him to get him out of the car, right? So a palm strike to the face could be, in an officer's perspective, it's me distracting him while we unlock the door because he's non-compliant. And if he does want to decide to use a weapon or do anything else, drive off in the car, it is a tactic to distract him so we can make sure that doesn't happen while we arrest him. And the reason I brought up the knife is because it's an awkward position to have a serrated knife that's this long. I mean, it's not in a sheath. It's not on a door. It's in the middle of the floor, where initially when he opened the door, his hands were low to the ground. And so, in my opinion, there could have been an attempt in his mind that if he got bold enough, he would grab that knife and stab an officer with it. In my opinion, I don't see any other reason for you to have a big old knife on the floorboard like that. And I'm going after the fact, reevaluating the situation. If we were officers on the scene, huddling, having a debrief, it's like, hey, this is why we need to get him out of the car, because this guy had a knife here. Let me give you an example of something that happened to me. I went to a scene. It was a GTAC. That's all they do is drugs and gangs and stuff like that. And I just so happened to pull over to assist them because I didn't have nothing else to do. But I was there and they said, hey, keep an eye on this guy. The sliding door, well, he didn't want to get out of the passenger van for whatever reason. Now, I don't know what it was. maybe his police presence or something. When he saw me, he just decided that he didn't want to kill us that day. When we finally got him out of the car, he actually had a gun right next to his Burger King bag, loaded gun. This guy's going to go to prison for the rest of his life because he had got caught with drugs once again. And also, when I finally got him detained and I was the one holding his arms, he resisted to a slight degree, and I grabbed his hands as hard as I could. And I said, you better not resist or it's going to go bad for you. In my opinion, I used those tactics to deter him. When you go back and look at it, I think the police presence being firm probably made him feel like he didn't want to try us that day. He tensed up as if he wanted to resist. With me showing a level of force and officer presence, probably made him think twice about resisting, given the fact that it would probably be an interaction he didn't want. And I say that because he was facing life in prison, and I didn't know that. He had a loaded gun. He knew he was going to prison because he had drugs and a gun, and he was already on probation. So that's why officers have to be mindful in how they interact with people. How much level of officer presence you have to have, how much level of force you need to have to overcome a person's, lack of compliance. So I hope that makes sense a little bit. It makes sense more when you're doing a ride along with a police officer and you're physically there and you can feel how these things go south very quickly. And there's so many officers that have been killed in this same scenario where a guy pops the door open, the cop comes a little closer and he turn around and shoot him and drive off. And the cop have no idea this guy's wanted for murdering like 5 people already,
Let me say this, because this is important. There's a huge part of what you're saying, Officer Tatum, where I think you are absolutely right. I can't believe the situations that officers are sometimes put in, officers who have been shot, officers who have been maimed, life-changing injuries, officers that have passed away in the line of duty trying to serve us. And it seems that a lot of the times the law that protects the community is not always at the same time built to protect the officer's safety. So I think there's a conflict there sometimes. And that's one of the reasons why I would never be brave enough to do the job that you did. I'd never be brave enough to be in the military, right? I don't have that type of personality. So I want to get that out straight away. And when you say, hey, if you want to reach in there and stun him so that he doesn't reach for something that you don't know is there, as a person, I totally agree with you. And I might do the same thing. I might stun him 2-3 times because I want to go home at night. So I understand exactly what you're saying as a person. What I'm saying as an attorney is that that's not the way that our country's legal system is set up. You say, well, looking back at it, he could have done this, or looking back at it, we huddled together and he could have done that. The law doesn't allow you to look back in hindsight and see, oh, he had this or oh, he had that. The law is very clear that what needs to happen is a level of force needs to be applied that's reasonable based on what an objective officer would apply at the time that the force was applied. Not afterwards, where he found the knife on the floorboard or the gun on the seat. The force has to be applied, the level of force, depending exactly at the time that the force was applied. That's when you determine how much. So you say, well, I'm going to stun him so that he doesn't do this or doesn't do that. This doesn't do this or doesn't do that. If it's based on speculation, it's just not allowed. And I think that's setting up officers sometimes is putting officer safety a little bit at risk. So I agree with what you're saying in large part, but that's not the way that the law is set up.
Well, Andrew, I'm gonna let you jump in here real quick, but let me just clarify this real quick. I believe, and I agree with you, Lee, I agree with you on that, but I believe that what his actions were necessitated that level of response, right? The knife necessitates deadly force, or at least the threat of deadly force, but they didn't have that and they didn't use that. But when you have a person who opens the door, tells you, no, I'm not getting out of the car, slams the door, locks it, after multiple requests for him to open the door, he's yelling, he's arguing with you, and then you threaten to break the window out. He still is non-compliant. You break the window out. He still is he made every point to say, I'm not getting out of the car. So you are going to have to use force against him to remove him from the car.
And this isn't speculation, right?
And
So the
I'm
officers
this part
can make reasonable inferences from the why they've done thousands of traffic stops. I've been stopped many times in my life. It never ended up like this. Why is he not complying? Many people who don't comply, it's because they have paper out, they have warrants out, their license is expired, there's contraband in the car, there's weapons in the car when they're not supposed to have them. Officers know this. So they're not just speculating now that something could be crazy with this guy. His non-compliance gives them a reasoned basis to wonder what is going on with this guy that could be dangerous.
I agree. And what's that called? That's called speculation.
No, speculation is
No.
not based. Speculation is an inference not based on fact. Speculation is imagination.
No, that the fact is, you just said the fact. You just said that many people don't want to comply because they've got bad paperwork, they've got warrants, they've got a dead body in the trunk.
Right.
That's speculating. What you're leaving. Well, we can disagree on that. But what I think you're leaving out, Branca, and what Officer Tatum is leaving out is that yes, there was non-compliance, but we have to look at the type of non-compliance. There's active resistance and there's passive resistance. And this is something that we haven't talked about on this video yet, but it is very important. If a person is actively resisting, then the law is very clear, then you can escalate the use of force. If this driver, this young driver would have been punching back through the window, if he would have been grabbing the steering wheel and the clutch and trying to run away, if he would have been grabbing for weapons, then that justifies a higher use of force. But if the driver is just sitting there, if he has not removed his seatbelt, if he is not reaching for the keys to turn the car on, if he is not resisting the officer's punches or the officer's open hand palm strikes, that absolutely needs to be taken into account, and courts will look at it in every single case. And
he did that here.
He did what?
He forcibly resisted the officers here.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the forcible. Well, I don't know if Officer Tatum wanted to jump in, but yeah,
because Andrew, real quick. Let's because I just want to make sure we're clear on this. And so I believe, and I think this is what Andrew is saying as well, is that we believe that it wasn't a belief system after the fact that led them to do the palm strike. What I'm saying, let me just speak for myself, is that I think his level of resistance and his level of non-compliance led to it being reasonable to palm strike him while you're trying to rip the door open. And you have to use some level of force to extract him from the car. And that was a mechanism that the officer believed was tactically in line with getting him out of the car, the whole process. Now, it wasn't as smooth as I think he wanted to be. I think he was expecting a little more resistance. He palm strike, open the door is one movement. But it didn't end up working like that because he did it and then the door wouldn't open. And then they had to fumble with the door and it became an awkward situation. I think that any force above that would have been excessive, right? If he actually decked him like this in the face in the car, I think that's a more aggressive approach than a palm strike. He just really mushed him like this versus close fist hit is a different thing. Versus, and Andrew, I'm gonna have you come in here, is when he gets out of the car, now he's actively resisting. He's no longer passively resisting. He's actively resisting when he's out of the car. It took that many people to even get him to the ground. If it was just one officer, I don't think he would have went down.
So there's three levels we're really talking about here, not just two. So one is purely passive, where you're not doing anything at all. And on the other extreme is violence, where you're using force that can harm the officers. That didn't happen here. But there's also forcible resistance. If an officer grabs your arm to cuff you and you pull your arm back, that's forcibly resisting arrest. That allows the officer to escalate the use of force he needs to compel your compliance with arrest. When they get McNeil out of the car, he's upright. They start bringing him down. You can see his head go below the frame of the camera, and then he pops back up again. The officers didn't raise him back up. They're trying to get him to the ground. He forced his body back up. That's when he gets the fist to the jaw. forcing himself back up is forcible resistance to that arrest. Not violent resistance, but forcible resistance to that lawful arrest.
Branca, what you did though,
I'll let you get in real quick.
Okay.
I'll let you get in real quick. Let me just say this one thing. He also verbally said no. They said, put your hands behind your head. He said, no, stop, no. He was telling them, no, I'm not going to do it. So not only was he physically resisting, he was telling them, no, I'm not. And what are you going to say, Lee?
Yeah, I was saying that it's interesting that Branca skipped the part that you and I were talking about, Officer Tatum, while the gentleman was in the car in the face palm, and he just went straight to when the offender was outside of the car.
Well, the punch is the most serious use of force by the officers, I think, the punch to the face.
Well, we could talk about that, but just because it's quote unquote the most serious doesn't mean the palm strike to the face was what wasn't excessive. And
well, Andrew,
I don't know if
what do you think?
I just don't see it that way. I mean, I see the reaction of McNeil to the palm strike. He's not even stunned. It's it's not that much force. It just isn't.
People get concussed all the time. I'm not sure if anybody's an MMA fan or old school, but you heard about Bass Rutten, and Bass Rutten made absolutely famous palm strikes. And he was figuratively speaking, murdering people in the ring with palm strikes. Palm strikes.
I don't think he was one of these officers.
you have no idea, Branca, if this officer was MMA trained or not. You continue to speculate.
No, I didn't speculate anything. You're speculating. I'm saying he's a typical normal officer. We don't have any reason to believe he's a trained MMA fighter.
You have no idea whether he's a typical officer or not.
Why would we think that? Why would we even imagine that to be the case? What percentage of officers are professionally trained MMA fighters? That's not a thing.
I'm not saying that he's a professional MMA trained fighter, and I'm not saying that he's not. You're the one that's saying he's just a normal, typical guy, and I'm telling you that's speculation. I'm telling you you're assuming that.
I think it's reasonable to assume that he's an average officer, unless you have reason to believe that he's above average.
Yes.
I have no idea why that's
not reasonable to believe that he's below average, and it's not reasonable to believe that he's above average.
We presume things to be normal unless we have a reason to think they're not normal.
All I'm saying is we have no idea the capabilities of this officer. We have no idea that the training that this officer has done to subdue people. We have no idea at all. And we see a palm strike, which is a very serious strike. And we see it on a man who has not complied, which we all agree with, but non-compliance, passive non-compliance does not justify open hand head strikes to the skull, palm strikes to the skull. That's my, I don't see any case law that says that's allowed.
Officers punch suspects all the time in arrest, and it's not a use of deadly force. It's the use of non-deadly force. It's one of the most common non-deadly force compliance techniques that officers use is a punch to the face, and that's much more forceful than an open hand palm strike.
But you keep leaving out the most important part. You're saying, oh, officers punch people all the time. You're not saying that they punch people all the time who are passively resisting.
They can punch you for they can punch you for if you're just turtled up on the ground, keeping your arms under your body so they can't cuff you, they will punch you in the head, so you'll bring your hands up so they can get your hands so they can cuff you.
Branca, you keep jumping to the fact that the guy is outside. Me and Officer Tatum are talking about when the gentleman is in the car.
They have to get him out of the car.
Not with a palm strike.
But let's talk about these points. Do you think it's anything notable that he used a palm strike in the car and a closed fist outside of the car? Do you think that is him navigating the level of force he think is necessary? Obviously, he didn't think the level of force in the car was as necessary to close fist punch as he did when he was out of the car.
Out of the car is much more dangerous because he's surrounded by officers who all have weapons on their belt line. Whether or not he had a gun in the car, once he's out of the car, every cop there has a gun on him within reach of the suspect.
I disagree. I agree that the officers have guns, but I agree that this, I don't know the level of non-compliance. Officer Tatum, you look like a big guy. Branca's a big guy. I'm a big guy. If we have 4 officers pulling on us, one officer, you can see the officer who gives him a sucker punch is pulling him down by the neck. Other officers behind him are pulling him back. It is impossible for either you, Branca, or you, Officer Tatum, or me to go down in one direction when we have four men apparently over 200
who created
pounds
that
pulling us.
But that's not, I don't think that's true, because you don't go up. You go from the car to the ground. They're telling you on the ground, get on the ground, and he's getting out and he's not going down. They say go down, and they're trying to push him down and he gets up. And it wasn't until the strike on the chin that he actually complied.
I wish we could show the tape. I wish we could show the tape, because it appeared to me, and maybe I'm wrong, it appeared to me that there was at least one officer in the back holding him up, trying to put the cuffs on him. And you can agree.
They were trying to pull his arms back.
Exactly. They're trying to pull his arms back.
He wasn't going down. That's the thing. The thing is, they said, put your hands behind your back, get on the ground, right? They're pulling him out. They're trying to get his hands behind his back. They're trying to force him down and put his hands behind his back. Like they're going down to the ground, hands behind the back. Like this. That's how we're trained to do. Put their hands behind the back, take him down. But he stood up. He was resisting. We'll play the clip so we can.
And it doesn't matter whether he was actually resisting. All that matters is that the officer who threw the punch to the face had a reason to believe he was resisting. If it later turns out the reason he came back up is some other cop pulled him back up, and that wasn't known to the officer throwing the punch, if the officer throwing the punch had a reasonable belief the suspect was raising himself back up, that would justify the punch. He doesn't have to be right about this. He has to have a reasonable perception about what's happening.
All right, play it.
Yes, sir.
Is there a reason why you're popping the door open like that?
I don't have a window that works. Is there a reason that you're pulling me over?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a reason why I'm pulling you over. For one thing, inclement weather, you don't have your lights on. Two things, you're not wearing your seatbelt.
It's daylight. I don't need the lights. And it's not weather. It's not raining.
Oh, this is inclement.
It's not raining.
Okay, I'm not arguing with you. I'm telling you why I'm pulling you over. Give me your driver's license, registration, proof of insurance.
No, call your supervisor. Why?
Excuse me?
Call your supervisor. Why did you pull me over?
35. I'm $550 driver. I've already told you.
Why did you pull me over?
Step out of the vehicle.
No.
Step out of the vehicle. 25 seconds. For 9-4, the driver just slammed the door and locked it.
Call your supervisor.
So, you know, he's doing all this, and this is a very dangerous situation for a police officer. You don't have visibility of the guy. He's obviously irate. He's not acting normal, right? Like a normal traffic stop. He's showing signs of being aggressive for no apparent reason. So this is a heightened situation. That's why he's calling for backup. But one thing I just want to say, I don't know if this is going to be applicable. I'm trying to see, because I didn't pay attention to this the first time. When the officers are pulling up on the scene, people are complaining that they don't have headlights on. And there's two reasons to that. One is that the the emergency lights begin to take over the lights. So it's not always controllable once you turn the lights and sirens on. But the second one is I want to see if their windshield wipers on when they pulled up to the scene, because I thought I saw that, but then I don't know if I saw it. So just pay attention to that when we play it. Roll it.
But of course it wouldn't matter. I mean,
right.
If the officer happened to be breaking the headlight law too, that's not an excuse for McNeil to be doing it. That's irrelevant to his offense.
And then officers are exempt from traffic laws in certain situations too. So some people were like, the officer didn't have his seatbelt on.
Doesn't matter.
Officers don't have to have their seatbelt on in certain situations. Like I took my seatbelt off every time I conducted a traffic stop. As soon as I light them up, I take my seatbelt off. And therefore, I'm ready to maneuver. If I need to jump out the car, I need to chase. I got to be willing to be ready to move. So
officers manipulate the computer in the car all the time when they're driving, right? But if I use my cell phone in the car, that would be a citable offense for me. So it's not the same. And even if it was unlawful for the officer to do, that does not excuse McNeil's violation of the traffic law.
True. Roll it.
25 seconds. If anybody responding, come in from Commonwealth, block the vehicle, please. Keep your hands where I can see them, sir. My camera's on too.
This is one of the points that I've made in my video, but it's so convoluted. That one is that the officer is feeling that this is escalating. He wants to block him in. Two is that the suspect that is now going viral, he started the video right here. But the video he put out to the public was all of this was cut out of it. He only put the video out to the public when he was talking to the officer who's the backup officer that came. He cut all of this out from right now to when the secondary officer was talking to him. He cut that out before he presented it to the public, which I think was absolutely asinine. And I hope that in the civil case, they bring it up that he was being disingenuous in his promotion of the video. Roll it.
I've already told you. Okay. Okay. Right now, you're under arrest for resisting. You understand? You're under arrest for resisting. The longer you take us on, the worse it's going to be. Keep your hands where I can see them, sir. Okay. Sir, this is your last warning to open the vehicle and exit before we're going to break the window. Open the door and exit or we are going to break the window. Open the door and exit or we are going to break the window. No, he's under arrest. Open the door and exit. You are under arrest for resisting. Open the door and exit. You are under arrest for resisting. Open the door and exit. You are under arrest for resisting. Open the door and exit. You are under arrest for resisting.
Can we quickly address the call your supervisor?
It's so ridiculous. No, I actually have a question. Maybe we can address it later in the show. But I wonder to myself, I mean, of course, he could just be acting, in a ridiculous manner. But maybe he believes what he's saying. Does he believe he's entitled? Like anyone who's pulled over for a traffic stop is entitled to have a supervisor brought to the scene? Because that's not how that works. And I wonder if some of these young people pulled over in these stops, they think they have rights that they don't have. And so they assert these rights that don't exist. Of course, the officers ignore these claims to these non-existent rights, but all it does is increase the temperature of the interaction at great jeopardy for everybody.
I think these I don't know, self-taught lawyers or street lawyers, I don't know what you call them. I think they're telling people that if you want to do this, just ask for a supervisor. We were taught in law enforcement that you have to at least request a supervisor if they ask for it. Now, that doesn't mean that while they're in the course of committing the crime, you have to stop and call a supervisor. You know, at some point, we'll call a supervisor once we have the situation under control. But it wasn't a right. It was department policy that we at least come up on the air and say the person is requesting a supervisor. Now,
and he's called for backup, right?
I'm not showing up.
He already called for backup. So probably when he calls for backup, there's a reasonable expectation one of those backup is going to be a supervisor, right? That would be something that would normally trigger a supervisor to show up. But it's not because the traffic stop suspect is entitled to have a supervisor there.
Yeah, sometimes supervisors are busy. You know, people may not understand that there's only one supervisor per squad. So you have, in our department, we had 8 to 12 officers on duty and we had one sergeant. And then we overlapped. So between 2-3 squads, we only had 2 supervisors, between 2 squads. Sometimes supervisors out, we have supervisors covering other squads. So at any given shift of a 10-hour shift, we only had 2 supervisors on at one time. And with that, in the whole west side of the city, you got so many things that the supervisor can go to. So to think that it's a reasonable expectation that every single person who gets pulled over on a traffic stop is entitled to a supervisor's response is just not practical. And these young men are getting taught this. I mean, lead attorney, do you have a different perspective on this about the lawful legitimacy of demanding a supervisor or having to have a supervisor respond in order to comply?
Well, I kind of agree with Branca, but I really do more agree with you in the sense that I've watched a few of these body cam footages now, and when a person asks for a supervisor, the supervisor is called. Now, it doesn't mean that the supervisor shows up in 5 minutes, But if you watch enough of these things, and if you're in a community where everybody's getting arrested and the word on the street is, hey, if you ask for a supervisor, the supervisor is probably going to come. Then if officers are teaching the community this, that if you ask for a supervisor, the supervisor is going to show up, then community members are going to learn that. So when Branca says, oh, well, you know, it's crazy that they're asking for a supervisor, you're not entitled to it. I agree that you might not be entitled to it, but the officers, the police officers are training the community that if you want someone there who is a third party, someone who may be a little bit calmer, and you ask for that, the majority of the time you're going to get that.
But
now,
this officer is completely calm. At this stage of the interaction, what's he done that's not calm?
And there's no necessity for a supervisor. I've seen cops say, I'm not calling a supervisor because, and now I don't know what the department policy is. I can see it being reasonable, saying within reason, if a citizen is reasonably requesting a supervisor, just like if you go to a McDonald's and you're like, I want to talk to the manager. If you're reasonably saying, I would like to talk to your manager, versus I'm not paying for none of my food and you ate all your meal and you're like, I want to talk to a supervisor. You know, you may or may not get the supervisor to respond right away.
I agree.
So, I mean, the only thing he's been asked for is his license, registration, and insurance, right? And he's refusing to do that and demanding a supervisor. What is the supervisor going to intervene about in that interaction at that point? The supervisor is going to show up and say, you don't have to give your driver's license? I mean, that's not going to happen.
But to your point, Andrew, I think that, do he think that's what's going to happen?
Right. I don't know. Because again,
guys
I've been pulled over. I
that's what's
imagine
gonna
you
happen?
guys might have been pulled over at some time in your life. When the officer walks up and asks for your license, don't you just give him your license? I mean, that's what I've always done.
Yeah, I don't care if the officer's wrong or not. I mean, I've never even thought about it. Well, I've always been wrong. So I don't. I mean, I don't remember a time a cop put me on for no reason. I mean, I pulled myself over the last time I got pulled over. I mean, I was speeding. I saw him and I pulled over because I knew he was going to get me. And I gave him my license, registration, everything he requested. I didn't argue with him, you know, and, you know, I don't get it. I think that what happens is, and maybe this is an off point, but I think it's the animus that's created with these viral videos and societal pressures are being put on these young people to say it's a white man, so therefore he's bad. It's a cop, so therefore it's illegitimate. And we see even the one you brought up, lead attorney, like, even the black girl that's in the car, and officers are like, I can't even identify you. What are you requesting at this point? Like, get out of the car. And we see shattered windows all too often when these people, I think, have been told that you don't have to get out the car, when in fact you do. But let's play this clip real quick because I don't want to get off top, and then I can end it because I know as well, because I got to get to my show too. But hit play. I think this is right around the time it's about to get jiggy.
Vehicle's blocked in. Just locked it up. He's putting the window down. The fast try to talk to 25 seconds before.
I do struggle with the tactical things that these officers did. I don't know how they're trained. We weren't trained like this. We were trained to flood the vehicle with lights, you know, so that the driver can't really see what's going on here. These officers not doing any of those things. They don't have headlights on. They don't have a spotlight on. They're not doing anything tactical. And so I don't know if they were trained properly or not, but we were taught to flood. So in our patrol cars, we had floodlights, which is the headlights, and then there's a light bar above where the red and blue, and that is a white light. It turns into a white light to the front, and then we have the spotlight. And what we're taught to do is that we flood the vehicle so that the guy who's looking is literally, he can't see what's in front of him. So we have 5 and 6 officers can show up, and he can't really see.
It's like a wall of white. It's you can't see anything past it. Yeah.
And then the cop that pulled you over has a bright light on your rearview mirror. So it's bright and you can't really look behind you. So therefore, if he want to get out and shoot, he can't. He don't see where the officer is at. So anyway, that's just a tactical thing that I noticed. That if anybody cares, is I don't like their tactics here. Roll it. I think we're almost to action. Roll it.
Hey, I'm about to break a window. I'm about to break a window. All right, go for it. Exit the vehicle now! Exit the vehicle! Show me your hands. Here.
1033 at 1621 hours.
Step out. What is your reason? Step out now. No, don't touch it.
Put your hands behind your back. Hands behind your back. What's wrong with you?
What you mean? I was putting my hands behind my back. I was going wrong.
Ain't no talking now, man. Ain't no talking.
Fucking 2%. Bro, I'm doing, bro. What's going on, man?
You're under arrest. That's what's going on.
No, yes, bro. Yes. No reason, bro.
So I'm sorry, y'all. I don't have the other angle. We just have that one right now. He could probably grab it real quick, but I don't want to belabor take too much of your time. But if he get the angle, we'll try to watch that angle. But I just don't understand at what point do society and also the law demand that these people stop this. This is not a constitutional right to fight and argue with officers on the side of the road. I don't understand how. Then let's get to the civil thing, and we'll get back to
and we wouldn't want it to be, right? Because we would only have more of this, right? If the rule were you could debate it on the side of the road and that's fine, we would only have more of this.
Right. And even if you debate it, there's no determination that can be had on the side of the road because the cop don't have the authority to convict you. They just have probable cause to arrest you. They can't really convict you of anything.
Or just write you a ticket, which is what should have happened here, right? It should have just been a summons or a warning.
It should have been a warning. But let's go to the civil side.
Well, I think the guy had a suspended. I mean, he was probably going.
Yeah.
Right?
What I'm saying is that.
But I hear your point. You're right.
We know why. I knew exactly. I have never, in the history of my career, or have seen in a video where somebody has done this and wasn't committing crimes, like didn't have a suspended driver's license. You know, like the young lady you were referring to. I think if we're talking about the same video, what did she have? I think the no registration on the car. She had a suspended driver's license. She had some other thing she had. Like nobody I have never in the history of my career, and I've pulled over probably several hundred people in my career, and I have never had a person be non-compliant on a traffic stop that was completely legit. Like non-compliant. I had people disagree, right? I did run in stop sign. Okay, that's fine. You know. But I've never had a person non-compliant, meaning shutting the door, rolling up the window, doing all that didn't have a suspended driver's license, other things that they didn't want us to know. Because this guy did have marijuana on him, and he had a suspended driver's license, and all this other stuff. And to be honest, that's why he was acting like that. And I think that a lot of officers can sense that. And
well, it's actual experience, right? That's what makes it different than speculation. If you have the experience, the professional experience, time and time again, that when drivers are non-compliant, it turns out to be a higher risk, more stuff going on behind the scenes, warrants, all kinds of stuff, that it becomes much more common with the non-compliant drivers and the compliant drivers. That's not speculation. That's working off your life and professional experience.
I mean, we could call it speculation. We could call it a hunch. You could call it whatever you want, but it's the same thing to me.
Two things I want to bring up too before we run out of time. We have the video, so we'll come back to the video. Two things that are problematic that I think nobody's talking about. Even I didn't talk enough about this. I think one of the issues here is that the officer didn't mention the use of force in his police report. Am I correct, or am I missing something? Either he didn't mention the original palm strike, or he didn't mention the punch to the face, because none of those were caught on body camera. Neither one of those. Now, he must have mentioned the punch because he called for medical attention and they had to get treated for his hand injury. So he must have reported it at some part. But I think one of the problems is that he didn't mention the palm strike in the car when he wrote his report.
I'm looking at it here. He says physical force was applied to the suspect and he was taken to the ground.
Yeah, so he didn't mention the one in the car, and I think that people had a problem with that.
Well, I mean, even physical force doesn't connote a punch to the face.
Yep.
And then I think he also lied and said that the driver was reaching for that machete, basically, that he had down there. So the officer was absolutely trying to doctor these reports. And usually,
that's not clear to me that it's a lie. Remember, the report's written after the fact, right? So when the report is written, they know there was a knife on the floorboard. So it becomes kind of a melding of information. If they were striking the driver and the driver's bending away from the strikes, it could look like he's reaching for something on the floorboard. And then when you discover the knife later, you go, you know what? That's what he was reaching for. He was reaching for the knife. That's not a lie. That's just amalgamating information you get at different points of time into the report you're writing after you're in possession of all that information.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that.
Yeah, I think that if I've seen this happen before, because here's another caveat to law enforcement that I think people don't understand. Lawyers have the ability to scrutinize after the fact and when all the circumstances are present. And sometimes police officers are not as great at articulating what happened in the kind of chronologically. And therefore, I think a lot of times they do get the benefit of the doubt, because it may not mean that you're lying because you don't say that you didn't punch him in the face with a closed fist. I think the difference between saying I used force against the person to take him to the ground versus a more thorough officer who's trained better, who understands how to testify in court, will be a little more over communicating in the case report. Like, I used to be an officer that I said everything, right? I said I grabbed his right hand, and with my right, I grabbed his left hand with my left hand, and with my right hand, I closed my fist and I struck him right on the corner of his chin near his, you know what I'm saying? I'm telling exactly why, because I want the prosecution and the defense and everybody to read my report to be able to visually see it with no evidence of a body-worn camera. Like visually, they can see exactly what I did, why I did it, how I did it. If I hit him in the car, I would have said, I believed that he was doing this, so I gave him one palm strike to the side of his left side of his face, or whatever, and I will articulate that. Some of these officers just don't, they're not good at writing case reports or articulating themselves, and they may be overly relying on the body camera and saying,
and some of these officers should not be on the force. Can we all agree to that?
No, I don't know about these officers, but I will say that there are officers that should 100% should never put a badge on.
100%.
A lot of lawyers shouldn't be lawyers.
Right. Yeah,
that's true. But lawyers don't have a monopoly on violence. You know, it's very, very important that these officers
do have a monopoly on prosecution or lack thereof, right? Justice.
The DAs. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
You know,
not
they
as
do
regular
have
ones.
a monopoly on, you know, whether a person get convicted or not, or whether they're, you know, skirting the system, not suppressing evidence.
Whether you're going to be put to the test in court, they certainly have a monopoly over that. And we have to keep in mind that there's a difference between chatter on the radio, a police report, a deposition, a witness on the stand subject to cross-examination. These are all very different levels of the comprehensiveness of information you're able to extract from a person or should expect from a person.
Right. And I also expect, and I think most people agree to this, they have experience being a police officer, whatever the case may be, even as an attorney, the experience with your client testimony is that sometimes people do get hyped up and they get tunnel vision, right?
Yes.
And this officer may not remember everything he did. And I think the public don't understand that because they're like, what do you mean you don't remember hitting him in the face? It's like some of these, and for lack of better terms, we used to use it, and pardon my French, officers, that we used to call it, they get assed up. So they get so puckered up and in the moment, they get tunnel vision. They can't articulate if they're the ones that open the door, unlock the door from the inside or outside, which hand they used, who opened the door, what officers were next to them. And I do think that suspects do also have the grace, right? I guarantee if you talk to McNeil after the case, he probably didn't explain it the way it happened because he don't remember it the way it happened. It may need to take a couple of days when the adrenaline dropped that he kind of remember, oh, no, they did punch me, or no, the dude did hit me in the face, or, you know, stuff like that. So that's why I don't really, when I read a police report and it's missing certain things, I try not to overly criticize it unless there's obvious, lies, like a person just obviously skating the law. And I also now, with the advent of body cameras, I give even more grace to the case report, because it's like, well, you can't lie to body camera. The body camera is going to show what the body camera shows, unless you turning it off and you should be on. That's when I have the conflict. But
cameras lie too, right? In a subtle way,
Yeah,
because the camera, what the camera is showing, you got a body camera on your chest. That's not what your eyes are seeing, right? That's what the camera is seeing. Heads pivot, right? The eye is another foot taller, sees into the car differently than a body-worn camera does. So we have to be very careful. Video evidence. Listen, I'm a huge fan of body-worn cameras. It gives us a lot of evidence we would not otherwise have, but it's not perfect evidence.
And I never used body-worn camera when I was a cop, so it had not gotten issued to us on our department. It did, but it was a pilot. And so when I was a cop, it piloted out to a couple officers, and everybody hated it. It was like the boogeyman. Right? Like we normally talk trash, we normally say inappropriate stuff. We say all this stuff. We have the freedom to be off record. And with the body-worn camera, it was always like, I'm mic'd up. Kind of like an NFL. I'm mic'd up, so don't say nothing crazy. But it never was.
Let me ask you. Let me just jump in. This is kind of an aside, but I wonder this. Since you were doing police work before the body camera footage, do you think the body cams affected the level of physicality of violence between offenders and police officers once the body cams were introduced?
I think I have to say, in all honesty, it does, because I think more officers are afraid to act because they're afraid of the scrutiny that they'll get with these contextual misappropriations, right? I mean, when I was a police officer, we had the ability, and we still had the dash cam, and I had the audio from the dash cam. So we still had the car camera, and and the audio was there. So if you ran, the video may not pick it up, but your audio box picked up you screaming and the fight ensuing. But I think that officers were a lot more heavier handed without the body-worn cameras in some cases. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think that the heavier handed, meaning that they were doing things illegally, I think they become softer because they're afraid. And that's why they're getting killed more than ever, because they're afraid to do anything, because they're like, well, what would this look like? When in fact, we didn't really worry so much of what it looked like. We were trying to take care of business and make sure we got home safe. And even without the body camera, you still had the process of any person can make a complaint, and every complaint was taken seriously. We had GPS tracker, and we also had the dash cam. So if a person said excessive force was used in this situation, we still had a lot of things that would support the citizen other than a camera. But I also think that citizens think about it too when they know they're being recorded. Because a person calling me an N-word during a traffic stop and throwing a punch at me is not recorded, right? Technically, I would have to document it in the case report. Now, with the body camera, do you think the mayor or somebody important would call me the N-word and say something derogatory to me because it's his word against mine?
That's a good point. Yeah.
So we do see a lot of citizens that pipe down. And I didn't have the camera, but I was with other officers that were piloting the camera. And you can see people look at it like, oh, I'm recording too. And then now their demeanor changes because they can't craft the camera. Like, for instance, if you allowed McNeil to dominate the conversation here, the officer would think the officer should get indicted. I mean, this was like excessive force to no end. They didn't even tell him why he was getting pulled over. Because the guy doctored the video. The only thing that saved the rear end of police officers nowadays are the body-worn cameras in many cases, because
I agree.
Now we have context, because the kid had context on his video. He edited it. The cop was yelling at him for several minutes about that he's under arrest, get out the car, and he was screaming at the cop. But he edited that out of his video that he made public, which I think is what they've been doing historically. So hopefully I can answer your question is, I think it has affected both police and civilians in good and bad ways, right? I think the good ways are that cops are like, thank God, now I can show the world how crazy these people are and how quickly stuff turn around, and I don't have to go off of he said, she said. But then also cops, that want to do bad, maybe they'll turn their cameras off or they try to, you know, hide it and finagle stuff.
They shouldn't be cops, as Lead says. I think that the good guy should always want more evidence. The good guy should always want more video, more all of that. And the cops I've interacted with, they're very comfortable with their body-worn cameras. Of course, they don't have a choice, right? It's policy. But like we saw in this video, the cops, the car door shuts and the window's up, and the cops can see the driver has his camera out. Obviously, the cops go, "Yeah, I'm recording too. I'm recording too."
I think body cameras are a net positive. I do think the apprehension was never evidence based. The apprehension was if I say something, because people may not notice, and doctors do it. They don't have cameras on them, but sometimes when we see horrific stuff, we make fun of it. We laugh at it. We do weird stuff to kind of divert the pain in your mind. You know, you see somebody dead, you may joke a little bit like, look at that. You see that maggot crawling out his nose, you know, or something that, you know, you joke about it. And you don't mean it to be offensive to the family. You just kind of like diverting that tension energy. But with the body camera, you know, it get caught on camera. And when you say, you know, that girl, you know, like for instance, we had this call, and I'm gonna shut up after this, I promise. We never have calls of like women, like for instance, you get a call, there's a woman walking down the street with her top off, right? Exposing herself to the public. It's never a good looking woman, right? I mean, you're never gonna see a woman, you like, whoa. It's always with her breast hanging down her lap. She got a beard, missing, she smelled like onions, and so it's always that. But we always joke about that. You know, me and my friend went on a call. It was a woman exposing her breast at the bus stop, and it's funny. She was across the street from the strip club. She happened to have been a stripper at that strip club once upon a time, and literally she had a beard and she had a hair this long on the side of her face. She had a little mustache, and her breast was hanging literally in her lap, and she had a piece of underwear that she wrapped around her neck and cupped one of the breasts in the underwear. Now, you know, we made fun of that when we left the call, right? I mean, we were joking about that all the way to the substation. So the body-worn camera kind of takes away some of that, where you kind of joke and, you know, some of the contextual stuff that the regular public don't know about. That's the only thing that I see people being like, oh, man, you know, like, turn it. I hate these things, you know. But let's finish that clip real quick.
Ask him, what did I do wrong?
Well, we're conducting a traffic stop right now. You need to comply.
See, I wish the public would understand. This is when he restarted. This is when he put out his recording. This is when he started recording, and that's why I was very disingenuous.
Well, let me just jump in right quick though. Are you saying that he started the recording and then edited some of it out, or are you saying that he just started the recording late? Because I'm not sure.
He started the recording and edited out the majority of the implication, that the things that would implicate him.
Oh, okay.
I knew this right when he did it, and I said it. You can go back and look at my video. You know, normally when you record, you hit the record button and you move back. You can tell that the person hit record and they kind of move back, and then now they're doing stuff. When the film started, he was already over here talking to someone.
Oh, that's a great point.
I noticed that.
And again, much earlier, the cop who did the stop, he says, you know, the door closes, the window. The cop says, "Yeah, I got my camera on too." I think it's reasonable to infer the cop saying that because he saw the cell phone come up.
Right. And if you start from that point, which I made a point in one of my other videos, when you start from that point, you hear him screaming at the cop. You hear the cop saying 7 times, "You're under arrest, get out of the car, you're under arrest, get out of the car." And so that makes sense that if you don't want to look bad, that you will cut the video to where you're having a casual conversation with the officer that we see on this body camera, and then moments later they're bashing your window out and beating you up. When in reality, he should have on camera all of that original confrontation where he was screaming at the cop, yelling, disobeying after he told him several times, because then he goes to the media and says, "I was just wondering why I was pulled over." Well, yeah, that because his video didn't have any context of why he was pulled over whatsoever.
Exit the vehicle now. Exit the vehicle. Show me your hands.
Here.
Crosses his arms.
I'm here. What is your reason, sir? What is your reason?
Step out now. All right.
No, don't.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
Stop fighting. Put your hands on your back. Put your hands on your back. Resist.
What is your reason?
Step out now. All right. Get on the ground.
No, don't.
Get on the ground. Put your hands on your back. Put your hands on your back.
I don't understand how people don't see this as you're gonna have to drag me out of the car. And then once they take the seatbelt off, he goes, "No, why you pull me up?" Like they've told him 100 times. And he even asked one of the officers, "Show me the law." He said, "When you step out of the car, I'll show you the law." And then when he gets out, he go, "No, stop, don't touch me." Everything is indicating that he is actively resisting them by pulling his arms and trying to close his arms out. And he, once he got hit on the jaw, to me, it was an effective use of force that worked. He didn't comply until he got hit right on the jaw.
He still didn't. Oh, you mean at the end when he got punched?
Yeah, when he got punched, he went to the ground like they finally asked him to do. I think if he hadn't gotten punched, he wouldn't have never went down. They would have been fighting him from the top. They'd have been wrestling. He'd have been standing up with him.
It would have taken longer, right? And the longer, the stronger the struggle goes on, the more dangerous it is for everybody.
Unless they would have got way more aggressive, right? Because nobody was really. I'll just say this real quick, and I know you want to say. I'll give you the last word, lead attorney. When I was a police officer, we would have went way harder, way quicker than what they did.
You had no body camera.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Even with the body cameras, our police department, the way we're trained and the way they support us, that unless you like doing something you ain't supposed to be doing, like knee strikes and other strikes would have been appropriate immediately. Like he would have went straight from the car to the ground. It would have been a lot more intense, I think, than what I see them doing, which is a problem in my opinion, because we used to be told in the academy, you ask, you tell, and then you make them. You don't play around with that. If people wanted to play, they should have played before I got there. When I get there, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you to do it, and then I'm going to make you do it. And whatever force I believe is necessary. And I'm not gonna punch a girl in the head because she, I can easily use my techniques of pain compliance or arm bar. They teach us how to take people to the ground, So, but I think these officers just super soft, man. And I think you got to get on these people a lot quicker and let them know that there's no games being played. If you see cops in certain parts of the country versus cops in the South, you see a different tempo. Like most in the South, cops don't play with you. They will whoop you. And totally nobody's gonna confront them about it. And it's justified because they don't have to play patty cake with you on the side of the road and make sure your temperature is right, rub your back of your head and say, so it's gonna be okay, sweetheart. I know you committed a crime, but you can listen to us if you want to. Maybe we can spend 15, 20 minutes in here trying to convince you to listen. When we've made it very clear according to the law, and you agreed to these laws when you got your driver's license, that you were going to abide by these traffic laws. So anyway, I'll give you the last word, lead attorney. And also, Andrew, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. I'll just say, and I just saw through, I guess, the previous footage that you showed. When I looked at his footage, the driver's footage, it looked to me that the officer was kind of standing outside. His head was outside of the car. And the guy, sometimes his hand was like this, and then sometimes his hands were like this. I was like, man, the officer really couldn't see his hands. But from the video that you showed, not this video, but the last clip, you could actively see that the officer's head was peeked inside the window. So the officer saw this man's hands at all times, once the window was broken out. And then, of course, when he was pulled out, they had 4 or 5 guys on him. Some guys were pushing him forward. It's my opinion. Some guys were pushing him back, trying to get the cuffs on him. He's being ragdolled everywhere. I absolutely view that as passive resistance. I think him being in the car was passive resistance. And the law is very clear that when you have passive resistance, these types of intermediate force, these head strikes, these chin strikes, They're just not allowed. Now, Branca's going to disagree, and this is one of the cases where reasonable people can disagree, and that's fine. No one's really going to know who's right or wrong between me and Branca until a judge decides the case, and then Branca tell you, hey, Judge A might go for Branca, and Judge B might go for Lee, Judge C might go for Tatum. So you never really know who's right and who's wrong, but I absolutely believe that this man was victimized. I think he asked for it, but I don't think he deserved it. I think that if you are a police officer and you are trained and experienced and you have weapons on your body, I think you should be held to a higher standard. And you should have a little bit more patience than the regular person. You understand, typically you may live in these communities. These are your community members. We have no idea what's going on in the heads of some of these people. Now, there's a huge part of me that, you know, I back the blue like everybody else. If I was in trouble, Lord knows I would call you guys. You guys need to make it home safe at night. You know, if I was a cop, I would want to be a cop before the body cameras came out so I can assure, hey, man, we're going to get this thing taken care of quick. But because you have body cameras and the way that the law is structured, I think the law does give a lot of protections to the community members. So it's my opinion in this case that excessive force was used. Although I definitely see your point, Officer Tatum, that, I mean, at the end of the day, the cops need to make it home. This country would be ruined without our officers and our military. We would be nothing. So, you know, I lived in a country 5 or 6 years on and off, and their military, I mean, you could pay them off with $20. I mean, they'll kidnap you. The police officers would kidnap you. And so there's a part of me, when I see somebody get sucker punched in the face, I see all these Americans all outraged. Hey, man, you don't know what it could be, but you don't want to judge America by these third world countries either. We are the best country in the nation. We're supposed to be the best country in the nation, and we need to support our community like that. So, you know, I kind of see both sides. Definitely want to back the blue. Definitely want our officers to make it home safe. This nation depends on officers, but every now and then you're going to get a rogue officer that victimizes community members. And I think that's what happened here, even though the community member was obstructing, or let's say passively resisting, he was asking for it. So that's kind of my view on it.
Well, I certainly agree that there are bad cops exist. That's the thing. Bad cops should not be police officers. When we identify them, we should strip them of their law enforcement authority and or prosecute or sue them as appropriate under the circumstances. I don't see that here. But again, reasonable people can disagree, by which I mean, of course, that I can be reasonably correct and everyone else can be reasonably incorrect. But I just don't see that here. But of course, it's there are these cases where there's always a subjective factor here, right? How people feel about the use of force. There are some bright lines, like there's definite conditions that have to be met before you can go to deadly force, for example, where it's possible to be somewhat more objective. I think in these non-deadly forces here, there's a lot more room for subjectivity because there is such a continuum between, as you say, ask, tell, compel them to do it, whether it's you're using a pressure point technique or joint technique or dragging someone out of a car or open hand slapping him or punching him in the face. This is all along a spectrum of continuity, and people can disagree about what's appropriate under the circumstances. I don't see a crime here. I don't really focus on the civil stuff because that's just money, and I don't care what's happening with other people's money. But I don't see criminal conduct here.
Real quick, let's talk about the civil suit. In my opinion, Benjamin Crump is an ambulance chasing. He just want to make money off of this stuff. He never get justice for anybody. I think all the cases he won, there's never been a cop, maybe one, that have actually been found responsible for anything. He finds a way to turn this into a political thing where departments settle for millions of dollars when people are justifiably shot and whatever case may be. Michael Brown was a perfect example. Michael Brown apparently got paid out, and it was proven that the officer acted in reasonable and that he was a threat to the officer. The officer justifiably used deadly force, and they still paid him out. So
politicians are always happy to spend other people's money. They're spending taxpayer money, right? So politicians are always happy to spend other people's money to make their political problems go away. And Benjamin Crump recognizes this. I don't know if Benjamin Crump ever goes to trial. I think he almost invariably gets a very wealthy settlement. That's a legitimate part of the civil litigation process.
So do you guys think, I go with you, I start with you, lead attorney. Do you think that he's going to legitimately get a payout? Like,
I think he deserves a payout. Now, there's a part of me that hopes that he doesn't get a dime. You know, if he gets, let's say, $2 million, what is that going to do? Number one, it's going to do exactly what Branca said, and it's not even going to have the officer who's punching him pay the money. It's going to be the taxpayers. And
Right.
then there's also this kind of, there's this incentive. It's like, hey, if I'm 23 years old, and I'm driving some Kia and I'm making $17 an hour and I resist, it could be that 8 months later I'm a multimillionaire. I'm going to be like Branca and have a suspicion, have a hunch. I'm going to speculate a little bit and say that this man's probably never going to see $2 million in his life, but it could absolutely be the case that there's some settlement there. I do, though, at the end of the day, feel like that he was done wrong. We can talk about the open hand strike to the face. We can talk about the sucker punch to the chin. We can talk about the shots to the thighs. One of them looked like a nut shot. I absolutely believe this officer was excessive, and the law states that, hey, if an officer is unreasonably excessive with you, you may be entitled to compensation. So I have no problem with him bringing this suit. I have no problem if a jury finds that this was excessive, then he getting the just compensation that he's allowed. Though it is kind of like a morals dilemma, because you're kind of encouraging poor people to fight against cops and poke them and tick them off and see what happens.
I think that his whole premise of this traffic stop was to get to this point.
Mm.
I think his entire, I don't know if he ever really denied or believed that he wasn't, because in court, he pled guilty. He pled guilty in court. When they ended up arresting him, he just pled guilty to it.
Well,
Now,
he pled guilty to a couple things, but
I think he pled guilty and they threw out the lesser charges and they charged him with the resisting arrest.
But it's a lot like we talked about with prosecutors deciding not to prosecute a case, right? That could be for reasons completely independent of legal merit. When someone agrees to a plea, there's lots of factors that go into they may not even believe they're actually guilty of the things they're taking the plea to. They have to pretend they are. So just because someone pled to some things and not other things, it's very, very dangerous to draw specific conclusions from that. I will say that I saw a video recently, maybe a few months ago, about a young woman who got pulled over by the police. And she was clearly panicked at having an interaction with police. I mean, she was almost incoherent with fear. Someone had trained here to be terrified that she's about to be murdered by this police officer. And she hopped back in her car and just took off. And I had a lot of sympathy for her because you could just see it in her face. She's not making a reasoned decision here. She's literally panicking, and that's why she fled the traffic stop. I don't see anything like that here. This kid looks cool, calm, collected. He's not in fear of harm. He's recording everything on his phone, very flat demeanor. It almost feels to me like he saw this as an opportunity.
And I helped win a case like this. I was an expert witness, and the second lieutenant who got pepper sprayed in Virginia. I don't know if y'all remember that. He was pulled over at the gas station and he resisted to no end. And the one cop pepper sprayed him in his uniform. I don't know if you remember that. If you guys remember that case. It became big because it was all racialized, right? It was because he was a black man in a uniform. And the civil suit came. He sued him for $3 million, and he ended up leaving with like $1,200. And that's what I hope happens in this case, because when I testified as an expert witness, it was very simple to prove certain points that this was orchestrated. This wasn't he instigated a physical altercation. He wanted the physical altercation. He set his camera up. He deceived by cutting certain content out, and then after they told him to get out, even when they broke the window, he still refused to get out. Even when they struck him, he still didn't want to get out. Even when he got out, he still said no and tried to fight. And so he did all of this. He never filed a complaint, a formal complaint when it happened. He had his phone since March. He didn't even make a deal about this until much later. To me, I think all of those point to this is not an average citizen getting abused because they legitimately believe that they were pulled over for the wrong reasons. He was told multiple times why he was pulled over, even the seatbelt. You know, he said the lights, but then he also mentioned the seatbelt. And the guy also knowingly and intentionally was driving on a suspended driver's license. So even if the cop, you know, it's so many different angles of why this guy is wrong. And we won that case, you know, when we went in Virginia. And I think that this is one of the similar ones. I think they can disprove his genuineness and that the officers acted reasonably. But, you know, you wonder because they're white and he's black, there could be a conflict. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you both coming on. I guess my final thoughts is that I see from both perspectives. I see some of the things that lead attorney says. I see what you said, Andrew, and I think I agree in part with both sides. One of the things that I will say is that I just want to make it clear. I never was clear about this before. I don't think that I would have done what that officer did. And at least as far as the use of force, even though I don't think it was wrong, and even though I think he could justify, I wouldn't do it. And one reason is because I'm a big, strong guy. If I would have punched him in his face, I'd have knocked him unconscious in the car. Or if I would have never punched him in the face outside of the car because I would have knocked him out. And I don't think it to me, it didn't raise to the level of me having to knock him out. So maybe a smaller officer that's not as strong or not as capable may feel like that force is not going to be as devastating as somebody like me hauling off and hitting the guy in the mouth. So I wouldn't have done that. I think I would have used a lot more force initially, but the punching wouldn't be the force that I would have used. But at the end of the day, I think that the officer was appropriate within the realms of use of force. However, I appreciate you guys coming on, man. Thank you. Now that I did this once, I think the next time I do this, it'll be a lot more streamlined, structured. And I would love to bring on more people and do this more often when we have these incidents that come up, because I did learn a few things today for sure. All right. So I want to make sure you guys get the love that you deserve. So we'll start with the lead attorney. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, I'm pretty much just on YouTube. It's just the lead attorney. Really appreciate you having me on. You know, I've been a YouTuber for, 4 or 5 years, and I understand how hard it is to build an audience. And so for you to have over 3 million subscribers is absolutely amazing. It really speaks to the level of a content creator that you are, the audience that you're able to build, and really the human being that you are. So I definitely want to salute you on that and just appreciate you for having me on.
Appreciate that, man. Likewise, man. We don't always have to agree for us to get along and have a conversation. I think that's the best conversation to have.
And let me just jump in too, because it's the content game, right? So I did do a video, and it was like the whole Brandon Tatum is a bootlicking moron, but it appeared that certain people didn't watch the video; they just saw the title, right? But if you saw the video, it wasn't me calling you a bootlicking moron. It was the back and forth that you had with another YouTuber named Lackluster. And I will say that immediately in the intro, I put that Lackluster part up there, and then I put your response there so that everybody would know this was kind of, between y'all's thing. I have a lot of respect for you, what you've built on this platform. So, I just want to clear that up as well. No bad blood or anything.
And that's one of the reasons why I brought you on, because when I watched the video, I was like, is this dude calling me? And then I watched it, I could see that it was pretty much, kind of tagged.
Right.
We know how it work, man. You got to. It did well. It was.
Thank you so much.
But I feel like you respectfully disagree with me, which I appreciate. The people that disrespect calling me out like they want to go to fight me or something when they see me in public. I don't really respect people like that. It's like we can respectfully disagree. We can challenge each other, and I think that's totally good. But Andrew, 100%. Where can I find you at?
Sure. So of course I'm an attorney too. My core expertise is use of force law, self-defense, defense of others, defense of property. People can mostly find me on YouTube, just the Andrew Branca Show on YouTube. We do a lot of political and legal commentary there. We'd love to have people join.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in, there was a recent case where this young black girl shot 4 black young men. I think shot 2 in the head. I think 2 died or something like that. She's on a $2.5 million bond. A lot of people are calling her to join the Navy SEALs because of the marksman that she is. But if this case gets any traction, everybody needs to check out Branca's coverage of it. I think I was texting them last week saying, hey, man, you have to cover this case if it gets legs. He is the foremost expert on it. I'm an attorney. I've been practicing over 20 years. I'm retired now, but I'm waiting to hear his take on it. So absolutely check out Branca for anything self-defense or gun related.
Thanks, man.
Awesome. So we ended on a good note.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys for being on, man. God bless you guys. I'll definitely have you guys back to talk about other topics. I think it's important to not only hear from a police officer perspective, and I'm not acting like I'm the smartest one, but I did do the job and I do review these things a lot, and to have an opinion from attorneys who don't always agree, which I think
Correct.
is a thing. So
it's the nature of being attorneys.
yeah, I know exactly, because
if we started off agreeing, one of us would find some way to disagree. I mean,
we're going to find it. That's exactly right.
Well, awesome, man. Thank you guys for joining.